Hello, this is Erica with Launching Legacies. Welcome to our daily devotional. Today we are going to continue the vulnerability series that we started yesterday, and we're talking about God demonstrating vulnerability this time in relationship. And so we talked yesterday about this concept that God really makes himself vulnerable as a demonstration to us of how to be vulnerable, because vulnerability is necessary for intimacy, right? So let's go back what the word vulnerability means. It means a person who is, by definition, a person who's susceptible to attack. So it means that even if a person can defend themselves, if they're vulnerable, their defenses are down, so they're not defending themselves. And that's a key part of what this is oftentimes God gets this bad rap for being a mean God, or a bully, or not so kind, and so on and so forth. And even people read the Old Testament, they're like, yeah, he was so mean, and he was so this, and he was so that. But truthfully, that's not actually demonstrated through the scriptures, and we're going to look at it, because what happens is, if God is so mean and he has all the power in the world, he could literally annihilate everyone all the time. Like, he could just be killing folks just all the time. And now, mindful, there was a lot of punishment for people's actions in the Old Testament. God is not just annihilating everybody all the time. And that's not what he's doing. He's really very patient with them, and he's waiting with them through a process, and then they tend to not get that process correct, and then they go into a place of punishment. And there's a very cyclical relationship. But really, when he's not punishing them, you should think of all the things that they're saying about him and how they're treating him. And he's becoming on purpose, he's not defending himself. On purpose, he's not rebuking them. On purpose, he's not just slaying them all out. He is taking time to demonstrate vulnerability while they are building up this repertoire of distrust, disdain, and all the other disses that a person can build towards a person. So when we looked at yesterday Genesis, and talked about how God was of course aware, because he's God. He was aware of what was happening when Eve was listening to the serpent, and then when Adam ate from the fruit, like Eve ate from the fruit. And in that whole time, although they were rejecting God didn't, come down and act like a crazy person and just annihilate, like, what are you guys doing? And da. No, he lets himself be vulnerable. He gives them a chance to exercise their free will, which he gave them. And he stands in a position where he doesn't go defending himself. He doesn't say, how can you listen to the snake tell you things about me that's not true? How can you think that I don't love you? He doesn't go into a whole position of becoming defensive. He allows himself to be vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, he is putting himself in potential wound. He can be wounded. He could be wounded by the untrustworthy state and behaviors of the people who are acting. And so we see this happen again as we look at Exodus. So we'll fast forward. I'm not going to read scripture and verse for you, but I will give you some clear context to what we're describing from the Old Testament today. Remember, we're only going Old Testament today, and then tomorrow we'll shift to New Testament. So today we're going to look at Exodus. We look at Exodus and we find that the children of Israel, once they were released from Pharaoh, from Egypt, here they are in the desert, in the wilderness. And although they're being preserved, right, God is being good to them, there is nothing but grumbling and complaining. And God just stands there and lets them grumble and complain. Now, who becomes very upset with the grumbling and complaining more than anybody else is Moses. But God endures a lot of, look at what we have to do. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it's a whole lot of that. Okay. And so they're wandering in the wilderness because of their own foolishness, because of their own, misguidedness and their own behavior. But God is not being so vindictive every time he's just getting them. Now, they have some suffering that they endure. They definitely have some consequences to their actions, because although being vulnerable is important, we see that God is not being a full-blown pushover, right? He's not just letting them walk all over him, but they are getting a substantial distance before God takes action. And that distance is important, because what it does, more than even for the children of Israel, is establishing an intimacy with Moses, because Moses starts to take up God's case for the people who he had actually been estranged from for more than 40 years. So they were his people, but he was kind of distanced from them. Like, you know what I'm saying? He knew they were his people. He was going to rescue these people, but he was developing this intimacy with God and God's vulnerability, you know, because he knew how good God was. He's watching these people complain against them and be mean against them. So he starts to get this thing of, you know what, I'm going to defend you, God, because I don't even understand. And then sometimes he's trying to, you know, say, well, maybe give them another chance. But then he's like, but you know what? Why are they complaining against you? And what happens is this beautiful relationship that interweaves this vulnerability helps us to understand that for intimacy, for strong, meaningful relationship and this deep place of love, we need vulnerability. There is no place in true loving relationships in which we don't need to be vulnerable. We have to let our defenses down. We have to just be who we are. That's the God that Moses gets to know. That's the God that Moses defends, because God, he knows that God is all powerful. He could act right now and make anything happen. But you guys are complaining against him. You guys are being unkind to him, and he's not even taking the action that he could take against you. That's how you're going to treat him? Right? So he feels indignant towards the people of Israel because of the way that they are towards God. And God is, again, making himself without defense of these people and their accusations. It's quite interesting. All right. So then we move forward into, let's look at Hosea. There's all these examples. I want to be clear. So when Joshua remember, Moses doesn't enter the promised land. Joshua enters the promised land. He takes the people and they start to take over the land. And then they just completely become outright disrespectful. It gets really bad. They want other people to rule over them other than God. They want to do what they want to do. The kingdom splits, and we got all kinds of problems. Okay. And again, these problems are accusations against God. It's always this thing of God didn't give us what we wanted. God, why are you treating us like this? Oh, God, what are you doing? And so on and so forth. It's very disrespectful. But God sits and he endures it. Okay. And there's a lot of back and forth in that regard, but he endures it and he's good to Israel. And then we get to Hosea. And Hosea is a beautiful story because it is the epitome of vulnerability amidst a very, very bad situation. Just nasty kind of stuff. So Hosea was the prophet that was supposed to marry the prostitute. And she wasn't just a prostitute like a reformed prostitute. She was a prostitute who was very active in prostitution, although she was married. And she leaves her husband to go be with what we would call modern day tricks. So she leaves the husband to go be with these people, these Johns, tricks, whatever you want to call them. And she goes to be with them, and she is unfaithful to her husband who loves her, who's waiting for her, and has these children that we don't, it's not 100% clear that the children are all the husband's, because she's back and forth in and out of this lifestyle. So these children are born to this relationship, and still that doesn't keep her from leaving. She decides that she really needs to go and do her own thing. And so what is the significance of Hosea? Well, the scripture says that God is showing Hosea what he has endured with the children of Israel. And it's interesting because we're talking about people who literally just disregarded God. Like, I don't care about you. I don't care what you're doing. You're of no significance. Yeah, we're supposed to have a covenant, but you know what? I changed my mind. I'm doing this today. I'm going to go off and do what I want to do. And God chooses not to defend himself. And he tells Hosea not to defend himself. He doesn't tell Hosea, go ahead and divorce her because she's doing the wrong thing. He says, no, stay married to her. As a matter of fact, you married her knowing she was going to be unfaithful. He tells her to take yourself an unfaithful bride who's a prostitute. Just be with the woman who's unfaithful. And what is God saying? He's letting himself be vulnerable in the midst of a very treacherous type of situation. But then even when it's all done, the treachery is over, and this woman is in the worst situation of her life. She's about to be sold in the marketplace for nothing. Nobody even wants her. then the vulnerability increases. It doesn't decrease. It doesn't like, okay, this is over. I'm glad I'm done being vulnerable. Let's move on. No, he becomes more vulnerable. He pays the highest price for the children of Israel. The man pays the highest price for his bride, but that's symbolic of God paying the highest price for the children of Israel. And it says, he's saying what? Even when I could decide that I don't need to be vulnerable anymore because you are in a more vulnerable position, you can't even defend yourself. I'm choosing not to. You couldn't if you wanted to. And instead of taking that position and switching things around, he doesn't. He says, let me buy you back. How can I make myself more vulnerable? Let me pay for you. Let me buy you back. And let me bring you back home. And let me hope that you're going to do the right thing now. Because at the end of the day, that woman was so wayward that there was no guarantee that she would come back and even be able to be right after that. But she is, because she's watched her husband. God allowed the husband to be vulnerable in such a way that she recognized it finally as love. Here goes the key. In relationship, vulnerability is a demonstration of love. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying be mistreated. I'm not saying that to whatever degree. I'm not saying look forward to being mistreated, but look forward to not defending yourself. Look forward to being able to sit there and allow a person to truly love you and be loved back. Be vulnerable in a way that allows you to see and demonstrate love with purity. Because with defenses up, it's almost impossible. And God is doing such a great job at demonstrating that. I love this work. I love this work. I love this concept. I love this idea because it's so beautiful. The God that created the universe is vulnerable with me. That's amazing. And so I want you to meditate on that if you would. You could always read Hosea. You could always read the passages in Exodus. Read whatever you like. Anything in the Old Testament and you're going to get to the same place. Now, like I said, they did have some punishment for their actions. And so that tells us not to be fully allowing people to abuse us. But he demonstrates vulnerability more than he takes action or consequence for the actions that the children of Israel took. He definitely is more vulnerable than he is anything else. And so you should spend some time looking at that. Look at what happens in the Old Testament and how beautiful this message of vulnerability is interwoven into the relationships that are there. We're praying for you that you would heal, live, and grow. We hope you're praying for us. We will see you again tomorrow with the continuing devotion on the vulnerability of God. Until then, be blessed.